This is part 4 of a series that I started a few weeks ago called Breaking the Law. We've been making our way through the 10 Commandments to look at what they say. What do they actually say? What do they actually demand of us? And more importantly, are we even capable of keeping them on our own? So this morning I want to read from Exodus chapter 20. I'm going to read beginning in verse 8 and down through verse 11. Exodus 20, beginning in verse 8, down through verse 11. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes your sons, you, your daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the 7th day he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. So another pastor was outed for adultery this past week. And this happens all the time, unfortunately. But this one was a little bit closer to home because I kind of knew this guy and we moved in similar circles once upon a time. And I was saddened by it. It made news all over the place. I was saddened by it, but I wasn't shocked. I mean, I expect sinners to sin. I expect broken people to break things. I expect fallen people to fall down. As I've told you 1,000 times, I have a very low anthropology, which means I expect broken people to break things. I expect fallen people to fall down. So while sadness should always accompany stories of a leader falling in this way, we should never be shocked by it. My heart aches for all those that are affected by it. He's married, he's got 3 or 4 kids. But watching the religious crowd gather quickly to cast the first stone is always maddening to me. I mean, this is personal to me. I know what that feels like. I've been there. I've been this guy. Jesus used the law of God for people like this, for the stone throwers. That's what he used God's law to do. He said things like, it's not just adultery, but lust that breaks God's law. It's not just murder, but anger that breaks God's law. In other words, there is none righteous, no, not one. I made a post about this thing the other day, and I had some interesting back and forths with some interesting people. And this was the post. In the aftermath of this news, this was what I posted. This most recent fall reminds me of 2 things I learned in the aftermath of my own fall in 2015. Number 1, you are capable of failing in a way that is unthinkable to you right now. Number 2, God's grace and forgiveness are big enough to handle the fact that your greatest failure may be ahead of you. 2 things you guys have heard me say many times. And then I went on to say, exposure and humiliation are not the end of freedom. In fact, they are often the beginning of it. So some guy named Ed, not Ed John, thank God, but some guy named Ed on Twitter, which is, as I've shared before, the Satanic Bible, said, I'm sorry, but you are disqualified. I can't listen to you. You have no credibility. My Bible tells me not to listen to you. Okay. So, I normally just sort of leave that stuff alone. But there were a few people who jumped on there to defend me. One person from this church who jumped on to defend me. And I just kind of ignored it. I was working yesterday. I was preparing a sermon, and I jumped back on, and I saw that this conversation was going on. I saw what this guy said. I saw what the people who were defending me were saying, and I chimed in, and I said, Ed, When your day comes, and it will, God's grace will meet you there. And this was his response. I have been married faithfully to the one and only wife for 27 years. Do not tell me my day will come. You have no right and you are disqualified. Okay? This is where the law is helpful, okay? This is how Jesus used the law. So my response was, Ed, you haven't been faithful to your wife for 27 years. You've lusted, your eyes have wandered, you've fantasized, you have an adulterous heart. We all do. Jesus said so. The day you can truly admit that will be a day of freedom for you. The law is a useful tool because it chops us down at the knees and reminds us that we're no better than anybody else. I mean, the audacity for us to think that we can't fall in this way, that we can't fail in this way, that we will never be guilty of this or that. All of that stuff is already in our hearts. We may have not acted out on it yet, but it's all there. It's all there. And the law is there to expose that, to show us that it's there. The truth is that sin lurks in our goodness more deceptively than it does in our badness. Listen to what my friend Ray Ortlund once wrote. We feel the pain of our bad sins, but our good sins feel good, which makes them more poisonous. A person who commits adultery might feel bad about it, but a person who looks down on an adulterer probably feels good about that. Our good sins don't warn us. They don't shock us. They lie to us. They flatter us with self-righteousness, and we love that flattery. Our lying hearts tell us we're just fine, but we're not fine. Martin Luther once said that the law of God is a divinely sent Hercules to attack the monster of self-righteousness in us all. That's what it's there for. It's not there to show us the way of life. It's not there to make us alive. It's there to crush us, to expose us, to unmask us, to flatten us so that we'll finally come to the realization, the sobering, self-aware realization that we can't do it. We need help from outside. So God's law is a helpful tool. It humbles us. It makes us less judgmental, less critical of others, more empathetic to people when they fail. And the reason it does these things is because it forces us to face the truth about ourselves. So, for example, the 10 Commandments diagnoses all of us to be idolaters. It diagnoses all of us to be murderers. It diagnoses all of us to be adulterers and thieves and disrespecters of others. It diagnoses all of us to be time wasters and liars and people who get jealous and insecure and selfish and vengeful and untrusting and judgmental. All of us, not some of us, all of us. And when the Apostle Paul was reflecting on this truth in Romans 3, he concluded, there is no one righteous, no, not one. No one righteous, not one. So the 10 Commandments are a gift because they expose us. And in exposing us, they remind us that no one is better than anyone else. Wouldn't that be unbelievably amazing if we lived in a world where no one thought they were better than anybody else? We would all be a lot less judgmental. We would all be a lot less critical. We'd probably get along much better with the people in our lives. People would feel less assessed by us. We might feel less assessed by others, evaluated. It'd be amazing. I mean, I've often said that one of the best things that could happen in this world would be for everybody's sins, thoughts that pass through our minds, feelings, things that we do that we shouldn't do, or things that we leave undone that we ought to do. If every single one of us had our name and our picture with a list of all of our failures scrolling in Times Square in New York on a continual loop, I mean, we would be far less quick to point our fingers at other people. We'd realize we're really no better. We may be able to hide these things better. We may be able to delude ourselves into thinking that we're better. But when it's all said and done, God's law exposes us all. We are all sinners who have fallen short of the glory of God, Paul says. Well, growing up, I loved this commandment. Commandment number 4. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. I loved it. I mean, other than having to endure going to church every Sunday, which was so boring to me, I couldn't stand that. That was the part of it that I didn't like. It was the one day a week that my mom made us get dressed up. By the way, I promised her last night on the phone I would say this to her. My mom turned 79 years old yesterday, and I told her last night on the phone that I would wish you happy birthday. She watches every week. She says she knows you guys by the back of your heads. But I wanted to make sure I did not forget. Happy birthday, Mom. I love you. Don't we love my mom? Yes, we love you. See, I told you. Okay. We're trying to get her to move here and to go in with Stacy and I to buy a family compound out in Jupiter Farm. So we're working on it, Mom. But other than having to endure going to church every Sunday, which, like I said, was dreadful to me, the rules that my parents had for Sundays were relieving to me. I mean, we didn't have to do yard work. We weren't allowed to do homework. We spent Sundays at home as a family. We watched football, we played tennis. The day felt different. It felt more relaxed. We weren't allowed to have friends over on that day, which was sometimes depressing, but I had such a big family, 6 brothers and sisters and my mom and my dad, that it forced us to all be together and to play together and to do things together, and I loved that, loved it. The day just felt more relaxed. There was less pressure to get things done. I mean, I was in school Monday through Friday, and then Saturday, my mom, the slave driver, used to make all of us go outside and work in our very large yard. As my friends were going to the beach, I was being woken up early to mow the lawn, clip the bushes, paint the fence, whatever. And so on Sunday, we didn't have to do any of that stuff. We didn't have to do homework, didn't have to do yard work. It was a day of rest. So this was the one commandment I really liked because it wasn't telling me to do something, it was telling me to do nothing. And I liked that. It was telling me not to work. It was telling me to just exhale, rest. So I liked it. The only work I was required to do as a kid was yard work and homework, and I hated them both. So a day dedicated to non-work was a gift to me. I didn't understand all the implications of this thing, but I just knew that on Sundays I don't have to do jack squat, and I loved it. But as I grew up, I discovered that this commandment was just as impossible to keep as all the other ones. In fact, I discovered that the only thing more difficult than being told to do something hard is being told to do nothing at all. Like all the other commandments, this one unmasks us. It exposes the workaholic in all of us. When we hear the word workaholic, we typically think of the corporate suit who spends 90 hours a week at the office. We think of someone who can't enjoy any other facet of life because they're so obsessed with their careers. And since that may not describe us, we think we're not guilty of workaholism. But make no mistake about it, workaholism infects us all. Workaholism is much deeper than that, and it affects all of us. It infects all of us. It corrupts all of us. Listen to this quote. This came from an article in the Huffington Post entitled "Busyness is a Sickness," and the writer said this: "In America, we are defined by what we do, our careers, what we produce. It's the first question asked at parties, and often the first tidbit of information we share with strangers. The implication is that if I'm not busy doing something, I'm somehow less than, not worthy, or at least worth less than those who are producing something." Think about the word busy for a minute. I mean, over the past decade, the response to the question, how are you doing, has changed definitively from fine to busy. We say this all the time. Me, you, everyone we know is busy. And we're not just saying that. We are busy. Crazy busy. Busy with our personal lives, busy with our professional lives, busy telling people how busy we are. I mean, we're busy. We are addicted to productivity in one way, shape, or form. Well, why? Like, where does this come from? Because worthiness is synonymous with production in our culture. And more importantly, worthiness is synonymous with production in our hearts. The more we do, the more valuable we are. The busier we are, the more righteous we will be. However much we may complain about our overbooked schedules, exhaustion has become a symbol of righteousness. So much so that there is a level of shame attached to rest. To take a break is unrighteous. I mean, if I have a couple of hours to relax on a Tuesday afternoon, I'm almost embarrassed to tell anybody that I went to the beach. Okay, I mean, literally, it's, I immediately think, this person I'm saying this to works a typical 9-to-5 job, and they're going, oh, life must be easy as a pastor. You only work 30, sometimes 40 minutes a week. I mean, what else? You know how many times people have asked me that? Seriously. I mean, people are like, so what do you do? I'm like, I do a number of things, but one of the things I do is that I'm a pastor. They're like, oh, okay, well, but what do you do Monday through Saturday? And I'm almost embarrassed to tell people if I'm tired, if I'm exhausted, and I have some free time in the middle of the week, and I want to go sit on the beach or do nothing, sit on the couch and just scroll on my phone. It's almost embarrassing for me to admit that to people. Why? Because to rest in our culture has become a symbol of unrighteousness. To work is righteous. To produce is righteous. Righteous people are doing, working, producing, never resting. You know that I had to check this to make sure this statistic was true, and I found out that in fact it is, that the United States leads the world in unused vacation days. Workaholism affects us all, and as you'll see in a minute, it's not so much a matter of what we do or don't do, it's a matter of the heart. The fact that people are always doing, working, producing, never resting, embarrassed to tell people about their rest. This is one of the many reasons why I'm not really put off when people complain that preaching grace promotes laziness, which it doesn't. But even if you let that charge stand, I'm like, listen, given our natural proclivity toward overworking, a little laziness might be exactly what we need. Just to rest, to sit, to do nothing, to veg. Now, don't misunderstand me. Work itself is not bad. It's good. And hopefully, to one degree or another, the work that you do is satisfying. It's intended to be. You're intended to find some measure of worth and value in what you do because God wired you to do it, whatever it is. Some Christians wrongly assume that work is the result of sin and that heaven will be the absence of work. But work is something God created before sin infected everything. Listen to what it says in Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. And then even in this commandment that I just read, the fourth commandment, it not only talks about our work, but God's work. God himself works. He worked, he works, he will always work. So God is not against work. But what we're told in Genesis chapter 3 is that as a result of sin, work will be hard, and it will be frustrating, And it won't satisfy us in all of the ways that we long to be satisfied. It won't bring us the peace that we're chasing. Work is good, but work cannot be God for us. It will be difficult because we will look to our work rather than to God for worth, security, for purpose. Work and performance and accomplishment and success in this sense ends up becoming our God. It's what we depend on to save us from a life of meaninglessness or purposelessness. Sometimes we depend on work to make us feel like we matter, like we're valuable, that we have intrinsic worth. But the more sacrifices we offer at this altar, the more it demands. For every hour we offer, it demands a day. For every achievement we offer, it demands 2 more. Enough is not in this God's vocabulary. We can never do enough, be enough, accomplish enough. Henry Nouwen, who's a writer that I greatly admire, he's been dead for a number of years now, wrote this very aptly, very truly. He said, all day long we hear loud voices that demand, prove you are worth something, do something relevant, something spectacular, something powerful, and then you will earn the love you so desire. He was articulating what is a real pandemic in our world. Voices everywhere, all the time, telling us in one way, shape, or form. Ads telling us on television, pop-ups telling us on social media posts all the time, in our office, in our home, wherever we go. We hear, do more, try harder, climb higher, get better. If you really want the peace you're longing for, the satisfaction you're longing for, if you really, really want the acceptance that you crave, do more, try harder, get better, climb higher. This world is a performance treadmill. And even those of us who can recognize that find ourselves on it all the time. Tired. We're exhausted. We all feel the stress to secure a sense of significance, to be accepted and loved. And we conclude that if we're going to experience these things, we have to make it happen. We have to do it. The onus is on us to secure these things that we crave. In other words, workaholism is simply the attempt to save ourselves by what we do, by what we can become, by what we can prove to ourselves and to others. When we look at the command to rest, the 4th commandment, in this light, then we have to admit we're all guilty. We're all natural do-it-yourselfers, all of us. We want the kind of rest that comes from knowing we're loved no matter what, but we make the mistake of concluding that we have to work to get it. And as a result, life starts to feel heavy and hard and sad and unsatisfying. We can't seem to catch what we're chasing. This thing or these things that we're chasing always seem to elude us. And so we work harder, we run faster, we climb higher. But Jesus offers a much lighter way. Thank God. A much happier path. The gospel proclaims that Jesus came not for the do-it-yourselfers, but for the I-give-uppers. In other words, the gospel is not good news for those who try hard, rather it's good news for those who finally give up. Throw in the towel on this whole project. When Jesus says in Matthew 11, "Come to me, all who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." When he says that, What he's saying is that none of our work will give us the rest we long for. None of it. The rest that we long for and the rest that we look for can only come because of Jesus' work for us. In other words, Jesus is our Sabbath rest. This commandment was completely fulfilled in the person of Jesus. And now anyone connected to him, attached to him, finds, at least in small bunches, the rest that they long for, the rest that they crave. So when Jesus shouted, "It is finished," from the cross, he was announcing that his work alone can relieve us of the burden we feel to win, to get ahead, to be on top of everything. It is finished doesn't mean we no longer work. Clearly we do. What it means is that from now on we work from acceptance, not for it. We work from a place of peace, not for it. We work from love and approval, not for it. We work from a position of security, not for it. And this brings huge relief and rest to our lives because now we can enjoy our work and our relationships without needing these things to save us, without needing these things to deliver to us what only God is big enough and capable enough to deliver to us. So the gospel is the good news that God rescues us from the exhausting pressure to justify ourselves by what we do and by who we can become. Justification by faith is a big theological term that simply means Jesus is our rest. We may hear the phrase justification by works, which theologians, Protestant theologians anyway, over the centuries have attempted to debunk, because the point of justification by works theologically is that we have to be good enough and clean enough in order to get God to love us, in order to get God to approve of us. And we say, no, that's not true. Thankfully, that's not true. Justification is by faith alone. It's not by what we do. It's by what God has done. And so we say we don't believe in justification by works theologically, but we believe it functionally. We fall into that trap functionally all the time. Justifying, wanting our lives to be justified, validated by the things we do, the people we're connected to, the money that we make, the security of our family, whatever it is. We depend on ourselves to secure for ourselves the justification and the validation that we crave, that we were born to crave. And so while we may say that justification by works when it comes to God is a bad idea, and it is, the Ten Commandments prove that, justification by works is something that plagues all of our hearts, all of us. Well, the gospel sets us free from that. It announces that his work alone, God's work alone, can relieve us of the burden that we feel to be justified, to get ahead. It means that God rescues us from the exhausting pressure to validate our existence by the things we do or by who we can become. You see, in God's economy is very different than our economy. In God's economy, we are not compensated with meaning and purpose and security and peace and approval and love on the basis of our work, but on the basis of his work. It's a backwards economy, an upside-down economy. Therefore, ultimate hope and peace and security and meaning comes from God, not anything we do. It comes from God's unconditional love for us, no matter what. It comes from God's approval of us, God's friendship to us, God's delight in us. That's where meaning and hope and peace are found, not in what we do. You know that. If you're a relatively self-aware person, you know that you're a chaser just like me. The writer to Ecclesiastes makes this clear throughout the entire book. We are persistently chasing after the wind. Chasing, running, chasing, looking for that missing piece, looking for that thing, for that person, for that accomplishment, for that feeling, something. We're looking, something inside of us is broken. We know it, and we're looking for what can fix us. And we look behind every tree and under every rock. We look in our work, we look in our families, we look in our accomplishments, we look in the way that we look, or we look at the way that we look. We look in 1,000 different places, infinitely smaller than God, to give us what only God is big enough to give us. That remarkable line from St. Augustine in the opening of his Confessions, where he says, "We were made for you, O God, and our hearts are restless until we find our rest in you." And then centuries later, the French mathematician Blaise Pascal once noted that we all have a God-shaped void in our lives that only God is big enough to fill. We try filling it. We try filling it with 1,000 different things, but only God is big enough to fill the void that we have. So if you're tired of trying to make it on your own, tired of searching but never finding, tired of solutions that make your emptiness emptier, then stop chasing the wind. It's an exhausting way to live. I've done it, I do it, I'm sure I will do it, I've no doubt about that. It's exhausting. Unlike the uncatchable wind we chase, the wind of God's grace chases us. It catches us, and it whispers to us, there's no need to chase any longer. What you have been searching for has found you, so relax, breathe. It is finished. How many of you guys have heard my keys in the pocket story? Good. 2. Okay, I'll tell it then. Many years ago, Stacy's never heard this story, by the way. She's only heard it 60,000 times. Many years ago, I was late for a meeting, late for an appointment. I was at home. I couldn't find my keys anywhere. My kids at the time, my 3 kids were smaller, and they were notorious for picking things up and misplacing them. And so I questioned all of them. Have any of you seen my keys? Have any of you all seen my keys? I'm late for an appointment. I got to go. And all 3 of them denied even seeing my keys. They didn't touch them. They didn't see them. I said, listen, you're not going to be in trouble. I promise you. I just need to go. So if you know where they are, if you've played with them and you've put them somewhere, just tell me so that I can leave. And they all swore they had no idea where my keys were, that they hadn't seen my keys, that they hadn't touched my keys. And just about the time I was about to order mass executions in my home, I walked back to my bedroom, stuck my hand in my pocket, and my keys had been there the entire time. Okay, now I've told this story many times, and every time I tell it, there's always somebody who comes up to me afterwards and tells me their own keys in the pocket story. There was a guy who told me, I promise you, I was in Mississippi, and I told this story, and there was a guy who came up to me and said, I got you beat. And I said, well, tell me, what? He said, the other day, I spent 20 minutes looking for my phone between the seats of my car with the flashlight on my phone. And I said, thank you for telling me that. Now I know there's a bigger idiot in this world than me. I've also had people tell me that they have searched high and low for their sunglasses when they were perched on their heads the entire time. And every time I tell that story about the keys being in my pocket, you know, people always like, what kind of idiot looks for something he already has? And my answer is, every single one of us. We spend our lives looking behind every tree and under every rock for things like meaning and purpose and security and validation and approval and acceptance and love. And the gospel is God's shout from above. The keys are already in your pocket. Relax. Exhale. It is finished. Full stop. Let's pray together. God, thank you for your mercies, which are new every morning. Thank you for your grace, which is amazing. Thank you for your friendship and your love and your forgiveness. Thank you that you are God and that you've taken care of everything we need. And I pray that you would give us the faith that we need to believe it, that you would give us the eyes to see it, the minds that understand it. Because when that happens, we are truly set free people. That's your mission. That's the mission you said you were on, to set us free, not to make us good and clean, but to set us free. So I pray, oh God, that you would set us free this morning. Set us free from those things, from those places that we don't even realize we need to be set free from. Thank you for being our God. Thank you for being our rescuer. Thank you for being our rest. And we pray these things in Jesus' name.